4 things men do when they feel guilty in marriage. Have you ever noticed how a man suddenly changes after he knows he has done something wrong in marriage? I'm not talking about small mistakes. I'm talking about the kind of guilt that sits heavy on his chest, the kind he may never fully confess with his mouth, but his behavior starts screaming it loudly. And ladies, if you've been married long enough, you already know this truth. A guilty man rarely sits still emotionally. Something in him shifts. Sometimes he becomes extra nice. Sometimes he becomes cold. Sometimes he starts arguments for no reason. And sometimes he starts treating you better than he has in years. That's why in today's video, we're going deep into the real signs men show when guilt enters a marriage. Not theories, not fantasy, real-life behavior many mature women have quietly experienced but never openly talked about. And trust me, the fourth one, a lot of women misunderstand it completely. So stay with me till the end, because this conversation might explain behaviors you've been confused about for years. And if you love honest, mature conversations about relationships, marriage, intimacy, and emotional truth, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and give this video a thumbs up. It helps more women find these real conversations. Now, let's get into it. 1. He suddenly becomes too nice. One of the first things many guilty men do is overcompensate. A man who normally forgets your birthday suddenly buys gifts. A man who barely notices your hairstyle suddenly starts complimenting you every day. A man who has been emotionally distant suddenly becomes unusually attentive. Now listen carefully. Kindness itself is not suspicious, but when the change feels sudden, forced, or driven by panic, mature women can usually feel it. Because guilt makes many men uncomfortable internally, and instead of directly confessing what they did, they try to silence their conscience by being better temporarily. You'll hear things like, "I just want to make you happy. You deserve better. I've been thinking about us lately." And sometimes those words are genuine, but sometimes underneath all that sweetness, there's guilt hiding quietly. What's interesting is that many women miss this sign because they're simply happy the marriage feels peaceful again. And honestly, who wouldn't want peace? But guilt-driven affection often has one problem. It doesn't last consistently because it's fueled by emotion, not true transformation. And that leads directly into the next thing guilty men often do. Number 2, he becomes irritable and starts unnecessary arguments. This one confuses a lot of women. You would think a guilty man would stay quiet and humble, but many times, guilt actually makes men defensive and emotionally restless. Why? Because carrying guilt creates pressure inside him, and instead of facing himself honestly, he starts projecting discomfort onto you. Suddenly, your questions annoy him, your presence irritates him, small conversations turn into fights. He accuses you of overthinking when you're simply observing changes. Some men even start arguments intentionally because conflict distracts attention away from their own behavior. A guilty conscience hates silence. Silence forces reflection, so instead, he creates emotional chaos. And ladies, mature women know this already. Sometimes the loudest anger is hiding the deepest shame. A man who feels internally exposed may become emotionally aggressive because defensiveness feels safer than accountability. But guilt doesn't always come out as anger. Sometimes it comes out in another very revealing way. 3. He starts guarding his privacy excessively. Now, every person deserves personal space in marriage. Let's be mature and realistic about that. But there's a difference between privacy and secrecy. A guilty man often becomes overly protective of things he never used to hide. Suddenly, his phone is always face down. Passwords change unexpectedly. He takes calls outside. He becomes nervous when you walk into the room. Even innocent questions start feeling like interrogation to him. And here's what many women notice instinctively. The energy changes before the evidence ever appears. Women are deeply observant emotionally. Most times you notice the emotional distance first before you notice the physical signs. You start feeling like something is off. This doesn't feel normal. He's here physically, but mentally somewhere else. That emotional disconnect often comes from internal guilt, creating emotional separation. Because when a man feels guilty, closeness becomes uncomfortable. Real intimacy requires openness, and guilt fears exposure. But perhaps the most painful thing guilty men do in marriage is this next one. He starts treating you like the problem. This one hurts deeply because it can slowly damage a woman's confidence. Instead of admitting what he did wrong, some guilty men begin rewriting the story emotionally. Suddenly, you're too emotional, you're never satisfied, you're too suspicious, you're the reason he feels stressed. And if a woman is not emotionally grounded, she can start blaming herself for problems she didn't create. Why does this happen? Because guilt often searches for justification. If he can convince himself you're the problem, then he doesn't have to fully confront his own actions. This is why mature women must never abandon their intuition, self-respect, and emotional intelligence inside marriage. Notice behavior patterns calmly. Don't panic, don't become paranoid, but also don't ignore repeated signs that something emotionally unhealthy is happening. Because healthy marriages are built on honesty, accountability, emotional safety, and difficult conversations, not manipulation, guilt games, or emotional confusion. And let me say something important here before we end. Not every guilty man is cheating. Sometimes men feel guilty for neglecting their wives emotionally, failing financially, hiding addictions, losing attraction, making selfish decisions, or simply not being the husband they know they should be. Guilt wears many faces. The real issue is whether the guilt leads to growth or destruction. A mature man eventually faces truth. An immature man hides behind excuses. And women who understand this stop ignoring behavior patterns just because they want temporary peace. If this video spoke to you, leave a comment and tell me, have you ever noticed any of these signs in marriage or relationships? And ladies, let's have a mature conversation in the comments respectfully, because many women silently go through these experiences alone. Don't forget to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with another woman who needs this conversation. And remember, a woman's wisdom grows when she stops ignoring what her spirit has been trying to tell her all along.